Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of .NET MAUI 101. In this episode, we're going to look at event triggers, which allow you to trigger some code based on a controls event without having to tight couple it. Let's see what it's all about. Welcome back to another episode of .NET MAUI 101. I'm your host, Gerald, and in this episode, we're going to talk about event triggers. Now, in other videos, we've already seen data triggers and property triggers, all kinds of triggers, but this episode is about event triggers, and it's kind of a special one because this allows you to hook up to an event of a control. We're going to see it with an entry in this case, where the text is changed, but you can also do it with a button that is clicked or a checkbox that is checked, something like that. And you can trigger a piece of code that will then do something of your choosing. So it sounds a little bit cryptic like this, but the advantage of this is that you don't have to tightly couple the code and your code behind, so your controls and your code behind, so that you can reuse these triggers and this logic for the controls that you're applying it to without having to duplicate code and do all that kind of stuff. I think it will all become clear if we just go look at it. So let's switch over to my screen and see how to implement this. Here in Visual Studio 2022, I created a new .NET MAUI project, and I've left the template as much as default as possible, but I did implement some bits here and there. So if you scroll over this, you can see like, hey, the scroll view is here, the image is here, the entry isn't here because this is a label typically that shows you hello world, but I changed it to be an entry because with this entry, we're going to show the event trigger, right? So we have the triggers. We've seen that in other videos for the data triggers and whatnot. I highly recommend that you go check those out as well. You will find them near the end of the video or down below in the video description, so that you know about all the triggers and when to use them. But this is the event trigger. So you have to do this entry.triggers, and then you can say event trigger, and then you have to specify the event. So that's the event of this entry that it's going to respond to, right? So whenever this event happens, it's going to invoke this event right here. And this event is a custom one. There is no built-in events for .NET MAUI because this is very custom stuff, but you have to override a specific base class for this. So I have the numeric validation trigger action, and it can be found because I have this local XML namespace, and I have declared that here, right? So these XML namespaces is just a handy way of not having to write this whole CLR namespace, yada, yada, yada thing, but I just can write local, and now it can find this numeric validation trigger action. So I have that here in my solution explorer, and I have this numeric validation trigger action. So that's there. Now this overrides, or this inherits, I have to say, from a trigger action, and you can strongly type that with an entry. Now, if you're going to do this with a label or a, I don't know, checkbox or whatever control you can come up with, you're going to have to fill in that control here, right? And that's basically only because it knows then for this invoke that it's going to be an entry or whatever control you're going to use that's going to be provided here, right? So this is where it kind of like loosely coupled. It's still tightly coupled to the type of control that you're using, but it doesn't really know which control, right? So you don't say like, hey, I have this event on this control and it's only going to be used for that one, and I have to figure out which control to reference in my UI, right? That's not something that you typically want if you want to write clean and reusable code. So we're going to get this entry, in this case, provided for us, and that's what you have to overwrite, right? So this invoke is going to be the thing that is invoked whenever something is triggered for that event trigger. Now, in this case, and then in this case, it's going to validate whenever it's a valid numeric, a valid double in this case, but you can do anything here, right? So you can trigger whatever logic is right for you. So here I just have this double result, and it's going to check is valid, try parse, and then whenever it is valid, then it's going to set the color to black, and else it's going to set the color to red for the text color, right? So we can easily see that something is valid or not valid. So whenever I run this on my Windows machine, I'm going to see that entry, but it's going to have hello world. So, but it should fail. So it should be red, right? That's what you expect. However, we're using a different event, right? So I'm using this text changed. And since the text is already filled here, the text change is not triggered. So my validation trigger is not triggered as well. So it's not going to be red. So that's also something to keep in mind whenever you want to do this. You want to make sure that it works for all scenarios, right? So you can see it's black right now, but whenever I change something, it turns to red, right? Because now that text change event triggered, that triggered my trigger. There's a lot of triggers in here, and now my text is red. But if I remove remove all of this and now I put a number in here, then it's going to be black, right? You can see that it's all okay whenever I do that. And even if I do, I don't know, the comma and the things are always hard, but the comma works, the dot works as well. So it does all these valid things. And whenever I put text in here, then it doesn't work. Well, it works, but it's not valid, right? So that's how that works. But you saw also some code in Commons, right? So what you can also do is provide some extra information here. So whenever you just provide a property here with a min value, for instance, you can suddenly check in your logic now, hey, is the is valid, was it is valid here? If not, it's going to be false. And is the result more than this minimum value? And now in your example, you can say, hey, I want to have this minimal value here. So I can say min value is 5. So now it will not only check if it can parse and if it's a number, but it will also check if it's more than 5. So whenever I put in 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 itself, because it had to be more than 5, right, is going to be red as well. And this way you have this very flexible way of coming up with all kinds of logic to implement form validation, Rook, all kinds of other things of your choosing that you can implement by just having this XAML and a little piece of code, which is very reusable. So if I remove all of this and if I put in 1 now, it should have been valid before, but now it's invalid. And if I put in 6, then all is okay. And that's how to work with event triggers in .NET MAUI. There is a couple of things that are very good to note here. So with triggers, you have enter actions and exit actions. I don't have a video about that yet. Let me know if you want to know what that's all about. But they are not used for event triggers. So whenever you're using event triggers, those don't work. Another good thing that is really good to know is if you're going to share these triggers in a resource dictionary, any state that you might have in there is also shared between controls. So there's basically one trigger instantiated for the whole of your application or the whole of your page, and that is shared among the controls. So if you have any kind of state in there, that's going to be shared among those controls. So that's good to know. If you see any weird behavior, then that's what you definitely want to check out. I've linked the official documentation down below so you can review that in detail at your own pace. Please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you for the next video, which is all about multi-triggers. What's that all about? Check it out right here.